Hi, my name's Tom Shue, and today I'm going to talk to you about how a camera makes an exposure and how to compensate to make a correct exposure. So if you look on the wall there, you're going to see this gray piece of paper. It's a dark gray piece of paper. It's not black. Let me show you what black is. Even the camcorder, what it's trying to do is trying to compensate and make that piece of gray paper look light gray, an 18% gray or middle value. This is black. So the paper is actually not black, it's gray, but it's darker than what that camera is showing you. What that Sony camera is trying to do is it's trying to evaluate the scene. It's saying anything that's light, anything that's dark, let's find a middle value and set the exposure so that it's in the middle or neutral value. Well, that's what a camera does. It's going to try to make this piece of gray paper 18% gray. And it will take a white piece of paper and make it 18% gray. So say if you're in the snow and you're trying to take pictures of snow, which we know is white, it's going to make it look gray. And if say you're in a dark scene and you're trying to make a picture of something that's got a lot of black tones in it, it's going to take those black tones and it's going to make them 18% gray. So let's look what happens. We're in aperture priority mode. I've got the camera set to 1250 ISO and we're going to work at 5.6. The aperture is not going to change. Say we wanted to control depth of field and we wanted to carry enough depth of field to keep two people in focus that were posing together, and we want to keep their eyes sharp, so we'd have to have a little bit of depth of field. So anyways, we'll make a picture. We'll see what the camera wants to select, and in this case it's choosing an 1/8, so we'll take a picture. And if you look at the back of the LCD screen, you'll see that this is lighter. Now, you can't use the LCD screen to judge exposure because you could have the brightness turned up. It could have the brightness turned down, and it could change what the exact file is going to look like on a computer. That's why I recommend tethering. But instead of that, you can judge exposure by looking at the histogram. And if we hit info here, you'll see that there's 3 types of histograms. There's a RGB histogram, and there's a luminance histogram. And you'll see that there's 4 sections, and in the middle of the sections there's a spike. So we can see that it's trying to place this image in the middle, just like I said it was. It's trying to make it 18% gray. Well, if you know anything about lighting, you'll know that if you want to make something black, you'll make it 4 stops less than 18% gray. And if you want to make something white, you'll make it 2 1/3 stops brighter than 18% gray. But that doesn't work all the time unless you have an accurate way to measure light, and a camera doesn't measure light accurately. It measures it based on manufacturing tolerances. You say the lens and the sensor in this camera body will be different than another lens and camera body and sensor because of the way it was built and the components used when it was being built. So you could try to get this paper to read exactly like it is, and you could guess. So say if we went 3 stops less, 1, 2, 3 stops less. So I know that I don't want it to go black, I want it to be gray, and we make an image. The image is quite a bit darker, so let's look at this. And I can barely see any texture in the paper, but it's too dark. So before I go ahead and break out the light meter and measure it, let's see what happens to a white piece of paper. Okay? So I'll drop this down. And now we have a white piece of paper. So let's see what the camera wants to choose for this. It says a 10th. Okay? So we'll make an image. And as you can see that it's not white. And that is a white piece of paper. So we look at the histogram. And then the luminance, it's in the middle again. Okay, so if we went 2 1/3 stops over, and we stayed at 5.6, that's 2 stops and 1/3, we'll make a picture. Okay, let's look at this. And you can see that it's got blinkies. Blinkies are a highlight warning indicator that I have turned on, and it's saying that this information here in the middle of that paper, that's blown out, it's gone. It can never be recovered. Especially if you're shooting in JPEG like I'm doing right now to keep the file sizes down, and I don't want to do post work on them. I want you to see exactly what the camera is giving me. This is blown out. This is not usable. There's no texture. So, how will we fix this? Well, we would use a light meter. Okay, so to use a light meter is pretty simple. You set your working aperture, your 5.6, and you set your ISO, 1250, right? So now we just go over to the piece of paper, and without our shadow blocking the lumisphere, there's a lumisphere right here, this dome. This light falls in 3-dimensionally. You know, it measures light from all directions. So this dome is representing a face. And there's two ways you can measure light. We could point it to the light and we can measure the exact light coming to this piece of paper, or we can measure the light that the camera sees by pointing it at the camera. Okay, so we'll just point it at the camera and we'll make a measurement, and it's saying 1/3 of a second. Okay, so we'll see what happens if we go to 1/3. Okay, so we'll go to 1/3 and we'll make a picture. Now we have a white piece of paper that's not blinking in the highlights and all the details there. If I zoom in, I can see that there's texture in the paper. Okay, you know, it's not crisp texture because it's a white piece of paper, but you can definitely see there's texture in the paper. Okay, so let's see what happens when we choose a value on this gray piece of paper. So we'll go ahead and measure this gray piece of paper and we'll see what happens. Whoa, it measures the same exact thing because it's the same amount of light falling in the black piece of paper or the gray piece of paper as the white piece of paper. So we'll make an exposure. Ooh, I didn't adjust the camera. I didn't adjust the camera. The camera's in aperture priority mode and it chose a different aperture. Okay, if I was in manual, it would be locked. So let's go in and make it 1/3 by adjusting the exposure compensation. Okay, this is a common mistake you can do when you're working in aperture priority mode. That's why I like to use manual. Say if you're in a scene that's got more blacks than darks, the camera's going to choose to meter differently. It's not locked in, it's going to fluctuate. So that's a good lesson to be learned in aperture priority. So now we're at 1/3. I'll measure it again. Yes, we're at 1/3 of a second at 5.6. And there's our gray piece of paper that matches what's exactly on the wall. And we'll look at the information and see the histogram. You can see that it's moved over. And it does represent that gray. Here's the texture. And I don't know if you can see it on the Sony camera, but there's definitely texture. And I'll share these images when I upload this video. So I think that you can see the importance of a light meter, and especially if you're working in flash, which we'll talk about later, you cannot use a camera's light meter to measure flash. So again, my name's Tom Shue, and I thank you for coming by my blog today. And until next time, we'll see you soon.